At my brother's promotion party, he insulted my daughters, but soon after everything changed. Please stay with me as I tell you my story, and please do not forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. The night glittered with fairy lights, champagne flutes, and polite laughter that barely covered the sharp edges of pride. Owen stood on stage in a tailored navy suit, his smile wide as applause rippled through the hotel ballroom. Regional Director Owen Mercer, the MC announced, and the crowd raised their glasses. I slipped in with Harper 15 minutes late, holding my breath as every eye turned toward us. She tugged at her thrift store dress, the one she'd spent a week hemming herself, her pink-dyed streak tucked behind her ear. We were out of place among crystal chandeliers and silk gowns, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. Owen spotted us, a flicker of irritation passing over his face before the charm returned. When his toast began, I thought maybe he'd surprise me, say something brotherly, something kind. But halfway through his speech, the bourbon in his hand loosened his tongue. He laughed too loudly. "You know, not everyone in the Mercer family knows how to dress for success," he said, eyes flicking toward Harper. "But that's okay, she's got individuality." The crowd chuckled uncertainly. Then worse. Guest Trent passed on the blue-collar taste to the next generation. Laughter burst louder this time, like a match catching fire. Stella, his wife, covered her smirk behind a wine glass. My daughter's face drained of color, her lips trembling as she stared at the floor. I froze, heat rising in my throat, pride strangling me into silence. A dozen responses burned inside me, but none made it past my teeth. Harper mumbled something and slipped away, pushing through the crowd toward the hallway. I followed minutes later, but she was gone, her half-finished lemonade sweating on the table. I found her in the car, staring out the window, mascara smudged. The drive home was silent except for the hum of the tires on asphalt. Halfway there, she whispered, "Why did he have to say that?" I didn't do anything. I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel. "He doesn't get to make you smaller," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. She nodded but turned her face to the dark window. Back at home, the kitchen light buzzed softly. I watched her climb the stairs, each step heavy with embarrassment she didn't deserve. When her door clicked shut, I sat alone at the table, staring at my reflection in the cold coffee. I had spent years swallowing Owen's arrogance, letting him talk down to me for the sake of peace. But tonight wasn't just about me anymore. The way Harper's voice cracked, that would stay with me. Somewhere between her tears and his laughter, something inside me hardened. My brother thought a promotion made him untouchable. He was wrong. The next morning felt heavier than usual. Sunlight came through the kitchen window, soft but cold. Trent poured coffee that tasted bitter and burnt, though he barely noticed. Across the table, Harper sat in her pajamas, her sketchbook open but untouched. The pages were full of colors and half-finished faces, but that morning she only stared at them without moving her pencil. She hadn't eaten, and when Trent asked if she wanted breakfast, she just shook her head. The silence between them wasn't angry. It was tired, hurt, and full of things neither of them wanted to say aloud. Trent leaned against the counter, watching her, feeling the kind of guilt that crawls under the skin. He wanted to fix what had happened the night before, but no words seemed right. He wished he could take the memory away from her, the sound of laughter, the pitying stares, her uncle's cruel smile. But it was already carved too deep. On the fridge, an old photo caught his eye. It was a picture of him and Owen as kids, standing beside a tree fort they had built one summer with crooked nails and two short boards. Back then, they'd fought over small things but always ended up laughing. They had been a team once. He remembered how it all changed when Owen left their small town. His brother had always been the one with big plans and bigger words. Owen got a college scholarship, moved to the city, and started climbing the kind of ladder Trent never cared to touch. Trent had chosen to stay after Harper's mother passed away. He worked steady hours, fixed things for neighbors, and raised his daughter as best as he could. Owen sent expensive gifts and cheerful phone calls at first, but every conversation slowly turned into a comparison. Somewhere along the way, The brother Trent admired turned into a man who looked down on him. Trent sat at the table and said quietly, "I'm going to talk to him." Harper looked up, alarmed. "Dad, please don't," she whispered. "It'll just make it worse." Her voice was fragile but sure. He saw the fear behind her eyes, fear of more humiliation, of being the reason for another fight. He wanted to promise it wouldn't turn ugly, but even he wasn't sure. Still, he nodded. "I'll handle it like an adult. You don't have to worry." She didn't answer, only went back to staring at the blank page in front of her. Later that afternoon, his phone rang. It was their mother, Patricia. Her tone was calm but tired. "Trent," she said, "I heard about last night. Please don't start a fight. You know how Owen gets when he's cornered. Let it go for the family's sake." Trent rubbed his forehead, his jaw tightening. His mother had spent years smoothing over Owen's mistakes, pretending his arrogance was just ambition. He respected her, but this time her words landed wrong. He couldn't let his daughter's pain be another thing brushed aside for peace. After the call, he sat in the quiet house, the air thick with unspoken promises. Harper's laughter used to fill those rooms, but now it was replaced by silence. He stared at the old photo again, realizing how far apart he and Owen had drifted. Somewhere deep down, a line was being drawn. He didn't know what he would do next, but one thing was clear. He couldn't let Harper believe that silence was the right answer to cruelty. A week went by, but the sting from that night hadn't faded. Trent tried to keep things normal for Harper, school runs, dinners, quiet talks, but there was still a heaviness in the air. He threw himself into small repairs around the house, hoping work would drown out the memories. Yet every now and then, his thoughts drifted back to Owen. His brother hadn't called or apologized. Instead, Trent heard from their mother that Owen had been bragging again, telling everyone about a major deal he'd secured for his company. Trent didn't care much for his brother's corporate life, but something about the story didn't sit right. Later that week, while picking up tools from a client, he overheard a familiar name, one of the companies Owen claimed to have signed. The client, a man Trent had fixed office shelves for before, mentioned that the contract had fallen through weeks ago. "The deal never happened," the man said casually. Trent smiled politely, but inside, curiosity began to grow. It wasn't like Owen to make simple mistakes about his work. He was careful with his image, always the confident one with perfect words. Yet Trent remembered how his brother sometimes stretched the truth just enough to shine brighter than he should. Maybe this was another one of those exaggerations, but something about it felt different. A few days later, Stella called. One of their shelves had cracked, and she asked if Trent could come by and fix it. He hesitated but agreed. When he arrived, the house smelled of lemon polish and expensive perfume. Stella showed him to the study and left to take a call. He got to work quietly, but then he heard voices, low, sharp, and tense, coming from the hallway. Owen's tone was harsh. "The numbers don't match. I told you to fix it before the review." Another man, his voice shaky, replied, "I can't hide this forever. Someone's going to notice." Then silence. Trent froze, hammer in hand, eyes on the door left slightly ajar. He saw Owen walk out, flushed and annoyed, still muttering under his breath. When Owen disappeared down the hall, Trent looked toward the desk. Papers were spread out in a neat but hurried way, an open folder sitting under an envelope with a company name printed across it. The same one he'd heard mentioned by that client. His gut tightened. He wasn't a man who liked snooping, but the thought wouldn't leave his mind. Something wasn't right. He finished the repair quickly and left before Owen returned. Driving home, the conversation replayed in his head. The tone, the panic, the words, "numbers don't match." It wasn't gossip or arrogance anymore. It sounded like something serious. By the time he pulled into his driveway, anger mixed with suspicion. The humiliation at the party, the fake smiles, Owen's careless cruelty, it all blended into one truth that started to make sense. If Owen could lie so easily about family, maybe he lied about everything else too. Trent didn't know what he'd stumbled onto, but the seed of doubt had taken root. He wasn't looking for revenge anymore. He was looking for answers. The thought of uncovering whatever Owen was hiding both scared and thrilled him. For the first time in years, Trent felt like he had a reason to stop swallowing his pride and finally see who his brother really was. Trent couldn't shake the feeling that Owen was hiding something. The more he thought about what he overheard, the clearer it became that this wasn't just bragging or pride. It was something bigger. Still, he didn't want to jump to conclusions or act out of anger. He needed to know for sure. One evening after work, he decided to call Sophie, an old friend who worked as an attorney. She had always been practical and honest, someone who didn't sugarcoat things. When she answered, he hesitated for a moment before telling her what had been bothering him. He explained what he had heard at Owen's house, how the numbers didn't add up, and the strange conversation that sounded more like panic than business. Sophie listened quietly. When he finished, she sighed and said, "Trent, if you're right, this could be serious. But you have to be smart about it. Don't make accusations without proof. Keep emotion out of it and stick to facts." Her calm tone grounded him. She wasn't encouraging drama. She was reminding him to be careful. She offered simple advice. Gather what's public, notice patterns, but never cross any legal lines. "If there's something wrong," she said, "the truth will show itself. You just need to look carefully." That conversation gave Trent direction. He wasn't trying to ruin his brother. He wanted clarity, and more than that, he wanted Harper to see that doing the right thing still mattered. He began quietly. During lunch breaks, he visited the local records office and searched through public company filings. Most of it looked normal, but a few entries caught his eye, small inconsistencies in reported expenses and missing vendor details. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it made him want to dig deeper. Through a mutual acquaintance, he met a young woman named Kara who used to work in Owen's building. She had cleaned the offices late at night and remembered odd things. Shredded papers in bulk, expensive lunches billed under client meetings that never seemed to happen, and an employee who had left suddenly after questioning invoices. She didn't know the full story, but her details added small pieces to the puzzle. Another day, Trent stopped by a cafe near Owen's office, where a barista recognized the company name. When Trent mentioned Owen casually, the barista laughed. "That guy? He'd always pay with the corporate card, even for personal stuff. Said it was all business." Trent nodded politely, but inside, the pattern was forming. Later, when he was helping Stella with a household errand, she asked him to take out the trash from Owen's study. He didn't mean to pry, but when a crumpled receipt slipped out of the bag, he noticed an expensive dinner billed to a client he knew didn't exist. It was a small thing, but it confirmed his growing suspicion. That night, Trent sat alone, surrounded by a few notes he'd scribbled. His hands trembled slightly. He remembered Owen as a boy, running barefoot through the yard, laughing as they built that old tree fort together. For a moment, his anger softened. He didn't want to destroy his brother, but he couldn't ignore what he was seeing either. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about honesty, about showing Harper that even when it hurts, the truth still matters. And with that thought, he decided he couldn't stop now. He had to see it through. Trent's quiet search began turning into something far bigger than he expected. One night, while going over copies of reports he had gathered, he noticed clear patterns. The same company names appeared repeatedly, each with strange payments that didn't match their supposed services. The numbers weren't huge individually, but together they painted a troubling picture. It looked like Owen had been padding his expenses, using extra funds that didn't belong to him. The more Trent looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't just carelessness. It was deliberate. He found payments made to small vendors that didn't seem to exist. The addresses led nowhere, and some of the signatures on receipts looked almost identical. Trent's stomach tightened as realization set in. His brother wasn't just exaggerating success or hiding small mistakes. He was misusing company money. It wasn't just about pride anymore. This was something that could ruin people's jobs if it ever came out. Digging deeper, Trent spoke with a man who used to work under Owen's supervision years ago. Over coffee, the man explained how Owen had once convinced an auditor to overlook missing records, using family references and charm to make it go away. It dawned on Trent that his brother had been playing this game for a long time and had simply gotten better at hiding it. What hurt most was learning that one of Owen's former clients had suffered real damage because of him. A project had fallen apart due to unpaid bills, and people had lost jobs. For the first time, Trent felt something different from anger. It was disappointment that reached deeper than family rivalry. He thought about Harper, how she had cried after being mocked at the party, and how she had slowly begun to smile again. What would she think if she knew her uncle wasn't just rude, but dishonest? He couldn't keep quiet anymore. Protecting Owen's reputation meant allowing more people to get hurt, and he couldn't live with that. One evening, Trent decided to confront Owen directly. He waited until he knew his brother would be home and knocked on his door. Stella let him in, surprised but polite, then disappeared upstairs. When Owen walked into the room, his smile vanished as soon as he saw the papers in Trent's hand. "What's this supposed to be?" he asked. Trent laid one page on the table, a single ledger showing altered numbers and fake payments. "You've been moving money that isn't yours," he said quietly. Owen stared at the paper, then laughed, though it sounded forced. "You really think you understand how business works? Everyone smooths the edges, Trent. It's called survival." His tone grew sharper. "Don't act like you're better than me." Trent didn't raise his voice. "This isn't about being better. It's about right and wrong." Owen's expression hardened. "You don't know what you're playing with," he said coldly. "I could tell people things about you, too." He mentioned a reckless mistake Trent had made years ago, something harmless but embarrassing if twisted the wrong way. The threat hung heavy in the room. Trent realized in that moment that Owen wasn't afraid of being exposed. He was afraid of losing control. The man he once called his brother was gone, replaced by someone who valued power over truth. As Trent left the house, he felt the final piece of his trust break. This wasn't just about family anymore. It was about justice. Trent sat across from Sophie in her small office, papers spread between them. He had told her everything that happened since the night he confronted Owen. Sophie didn't look surprised. She only sighed and said, "If what you're saying is true, this isn't just bad judgment. It's fraud." Her tone was steady, not dramatic, but it made Trent's stomach turn. She began explaining what needed to be done if he wanted to bring the truth out the right way. "You have to be careful," she said, leaning forward. "No accusations without proof. Everything you gather must be traceable and real. Keep records of where you found things and who you spoke to. If you act too quickly or make it personal, it'll backfire." She also warned him that people like Owen rarely went down quietly. He could twist the story, she said, make you look jealous or unstable. He might even try to drag Harper into it. That thought made Trent's jaw tighten. He promised himself he wouldn't let that happen. Sophie helped him set up a plan, a slow, careful one. First, he needed to build a clear record. He started keeping a small notebook with times, dates, and places of every piece of information he found. He printed copies of old invoices and bank statements, making sure to mark each one. Some came from a local vendor Owen's company had once worked with, a small fabrication shop where the owner still had saved contracts. The owner didn't realize those papers would become key evidence, but he let Trent copy them without question. One night, while Stella was away, Trent went to Owen's house under the excuse of dropping off tools he had borrowed. Owen wasn't home, and the housekeeper was cleaning the downstairs rooms. On the office desk sat a ledger page left out beside a stack of receipts. Trent didn't take it but noted everything he saw, the account numbers, the initials written beside payments. Later, he recreated it from memory and attached it to his growing file. He wasn't rushing. Every move was deliberate. Once he had enough documentation, Sophie told him how to protect it. Together, they placed the originals and copies in a safety deposit box at a local bank, keeping digital backups stored on an encrypted drive. If anything happened, the evidence would still exist. She also mentioned sending an anonymous report to the company's internal auditors or directly to Daniel Rhodes, the head of Owen's firm, when the time was right. Trent agreed to wait until the file was solid and undeniable. At home, Harper started noticing her father working late at the dining table, surrounded by papers and notes. She didn't ask questions, but one evening she walked up and set down a collage she had made from old family pictures, photos of happier days. "You said we fight for what's right, not for revenge," she told him softly. He smiled and placed the collage near his workspace. Every night before sleeping, Trent practiced what he'd say if Owen or anyone else confronted him. It wasn't about hate or envy. It was about honesty and the harm being done to people who didn't deserve it. He knew that exposing Owen would bring chaos, but he was ready to face it. This time, he wasn't acting out of pride. He was standing for the truth. Trent sat quietly in Sophie's office, the final folder in front of him. Every page had been checked, every document labeled. Sophie slid the sealed envelope toward him. "Once this is handed in," she said, "you can't take it back." Trent nodded. He wasn't nervous anymore, just calm, like someone who had already accepted the weight of his decision. Together, they went to meet Daniel Rhodes, the head of Owen's company. Daniel was known for being firm but fair, and Trent hoped that would matter. In the meeting, Daniel looked confused at first when Trent introduced himself. Sophie explained she was acting as counsel for a concerned third party. When Daniel opened the file, his expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief. Inside were copies of contracts, receipts, and witness statements, all clearly showing altered figures. Trent spoke carefully, explaining what he had found and how he had gathered it. He made sure Daniel knew the intention wasn't revenge. "This is about honesty," he said quietly. Daniel listened, eyes heavy, then finally said, "This will be handled properly. But for everyone's sake, keep this confidential." A few days later, the company launched an internal review. Auditors went through accounts, vendors, and reports line by line. The investigation was quiet, but word still began to spread. Employees noticed when Owen stopped coming to work. Some whispered that he was on vacation. Others guessed something was wrong. Within a week, he was officially placed on administrative leave. Owen didn't take it well. He told colleagues it was just a misunderstanding, a paperwork issue. But as more evidence surfaced, the tone in the office changed. HR froze his company accounts, and auditors discovered more inconsistencies. Stella was livid when she found out. She called Trent late at night, her voice cold and sharp. "You did this," she said. "You're jealous, and you'll regret it." Trent didn't argue. There was nothing to say that would change her mind. The hardest part came when their mother, Patricia, called. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Is it true?" Trent paused before answering. "I didn't want it to come to this, Mom, but I couldn't ignore what he did." She sighed, torn between disbelief and sadness. "He's your brother, Trent," he replied softly, "and Harper's my daughter. I had to choose what was right." A week later, Patricia invited everyone for dinner, hoping to calm the storm. The moment Owen walked in, the air turned heavy. He glared at Trent across the table. "You think you're some hero," he snapped. "You stabbed your own blood in the back." Stella sat stiffly beside him, eyes burning. "You'll hear from our lawyer," she muttered. Patricia tried to speak, but Owen slammed his hand on the table, shouting that everyone had turned against him. Harper sat quietly, her face pale but her eyes steady. She didn't say a word, but when Owen left in anger, she reached for her father's hand under the table. That night, after everyone was gone, Trent sat alone in the kitchen. He should have felt relief, but instead he felt the ache of loss. The truth had come out, but it had torn his family apart. The home he grew up in felt smaller now, filled with echoes of words that couldn't be taken back. Still, when Harper smiled faintly before bed, he knew he had done what he had to. Some peace was worth the pain. Owen did not go down quietly. As soon as he learned the investigation had reached a serious stage, he hired an expensive lawyer from the city and began fighting on every front. He sent harsh letters to the company, accusing them of discrimination and bias. He called former colleagues, demanding their loyalty, and hinted that he had dirt on Trent. He even brought up an old memory from years ago, a night when Trent had argued with someone after too much to drink. It had been nothing serious, but Owen twisted it to sound like proof that Trent was unstable. The rumor spread fast among people who didn't know better. Trent began to feel the weight of that whisper campaign. Friends who had once been polite started keeping their distance. At a community barbecue, a few neighbors turned away when he tried to speak. One even muttered that families should handle their problems quietly. Trent didn't respond. He simply helped Harper with her art display and went home early. Harper noticed the change too. Invitations that used to come from family friends stopped arriving. When her school hosted an art show, some relatives who had promised to come suddenly had other plans. That night, when she saw the half-empty room, she tried to smile but couldn't hold back tears. "I didn't want him to be broken, Dad," she said softly, meaning her uncle. Trent hugged her and whispered, "Sometimes people have to face what they did. It's not about breaking anyone. It's about truth." Even with Sophie's legal protection, the emotional strain was heavy. Trent avoided public arguments, kept his head down, and focused on work. Bills started piling up because he had taken unpaid days off to handle meetings and statements. Still, he refused to regret his choice. At night, when the house was quiet, he'd stare at the family pictures on the wall and wonder if things could ever be whole again. Meanwhile, Owen's world began to collapse. The company's board suspended him indefinitely while auditors completed their report. Clients started to back away, some quietly withdrawing contracts. His name no longer carried the same weight. Banks began asking questions about personal loans and investments. Stella tried to keep up appearances, but the pressure showed. One evening, Owen shouted at her in frustration, knocking over a lamp. The noise startled even him. When the firm froze his remaining accounts, Owen's confidence crumbled. He spent nights in his study drinking, staring at the walls filled with framed awards that now felt meaningless. In the daylight, he called old friends, hoping for sympathy, but most gave polite excuses or didn't answer at all. One desperate evening, he went to see Patricia. She listened quietly while he blamed everyone else, then finally said, "I can't defend what you did anymore, Owen. You hurt too many people." That was the first time Owen fell silent. Back at home, Trent heard about it from his mother later that week. He didn't feel triumphant, only tired. The victory, if it could be called that, felt heavy. The truth had come out, but it left bruises everywhere. Harper sat beside him on the porch that night, watching the sky fade to gray. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she asked. Trent thought for a moment, then said, "It doesn't, but maybe one day it'll hurt less." It was late when Trent heard the knock. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of the wind outside. When he opened the door, Owen stood there. His hair was messy, eyes tired, and his suit wrinkled. There was no anger left in him, only exhaustion. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Owen asked in a low voice, "Can I come in?" They sat in the small living room, the same space where Trent and Harper often spent evenings together. Owen looked around slowly, as if trying to remember the last time he'd been there. "I don't know where to start," he said. His voice cracked slightly. "Everything I built, it's gone. The firm, the money, the friends, all of it." He rubbed his temples and let out a shaky laugh. "You must feel proud." Trent didn't respond, only waited. Owen leaned back and finally began talking. "I kept chasing something I couldn't catch," he said quietly. "I wanted to prove I was worth something, that I wasn't just the kid from that small house on Maple Street. Every time I felt small, I lied a little more. And then when I saw how people looked at you, steady and decent, he stopped, his words catching in his throat. "I hated it. I hated how easy you made it look." Trent's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. "You had choices, Owen." "I know," Owen said quickly. "I thought if I kept winning, Stella would stay, people would respect me, and I'd finally stop feeling like a fraud." His eyes glistened as he added, "But it never worked. The more I had, the emptier I got. That night at the party, I wanted to hurt someone. I picked Harper because I knew it would hurt you too." Silence filled the room. For the first time, Owen didn't look proud or defensive. He just looked broken. "I don't expect forgiveness," he whispered. "I just wanted you to know I see it now. All of it." Trent took a slow breath. Sophie had warned him about this moment, about the choice that would come. The evidence he gathered could easily send Owen into deeper legal trouble. But doing that would drag their mother through another storm. Trent looked at his brother and said, "You'll make it right. You'll pay back what you owe, and you'll face the company. But this time you do it honestly." A week later, Owen sat before Daniel and the audit committee. He had written a letter on his own, his handwriting uneven but sincere. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and strained. He apologized to the company, to the clients, and then turned his eyes toward Harper, who sat at the back of the room beside Trent. "I hurt you when you did nothing wrong," he said, his voice trembling. "It came from my own jealousy, not your fault. You deserved kindness, not shame." Harper didn't answer, but her eyes softened. For the first time, she saw her uncle not as the man who humiliated her, but as someone finally seeing the damage he caused. After the hearing, Owen agreed to step down and take part in a rehabilitation program. There was no celebration, no dramatic ending, just quiet acceptance. As Trent and Harper walked home, she slipped her hand into his. "I think I can forgive him," she said softly. Trent nodded. "That's enough," he replied. And for the first time in months, the air felt lighter. Months passed quietly after the hearing. Owen resigned from his position at the firm and agreed to repay what he owed. The company kept things discreet, but everyone understood he wouldn't be returning. He sold his house and moved to a smaller town a few hours away. The new job he found didn't pay much, yet it was honest work. For the first time in years, Owen was no longer chasing status. He was just trying to start over. Patricia kept in touch with both sons, though her calls grew shorter and more careful. Stella refused any contact. The family gatherings that once filled holidays stopped. The silence hurt, but Trent accepted it. Some distance was better than pretending. At home, he and Harper focused on steady routines, school mornings, simple dinners, weekend projects. They found comfort in small habits that made life feel normal again. Harper slowly regained her confidence. She spent more time with her art, painting and sketching whenever she could. When a local community gallery invited her to display her work, she hesitated at first but agreed after Trent's gentle encouragement. Sophie stopped by now and then, checking in like an old friend rather than a lawyer. "You did the right thing," she told Trent once, "even if it cost you peace for a while." He nodded, knowing she was right. The night of the art show, the gallery glowed with warm lights. Families and neighbors admired the paintings lined up along the walls. Harper's main piece stood at the center, a mixed-media artwork she called Unsaid. It was made of layered textures, quiet but powerful. Trent stood near the back, watching her talk to visitors. He saw pride in her eyes, the kind that didn't need words. A woman from the gallery board approached him, smiling. "You must be her father," she said. "She's talented. And I've heard a little about what you did." It took courage. Trent answered simply, "I just didn't want her to be humiliated again." When Harper spotted him, she came over and squeezed his hand. They didn't need to speak. In that moment, the noise of the room faded and everything felt settled. Trent didn't see victory in what had happened, only balance. He hadn't won against Owen. He had stood up for what mattered. The family might never be the same, but something stronger had grown in its place. Honesty, quiet respect, and the peace of knowing he had done right by his daughter. "Do you think I did the right thing by standing up for my daughter and walking away from my brother's lies? Or should I have forgiven him? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this."